It is common knowledge that the course of Western philosophy began in ancient Greece, where the young culture of Athens made its first steps in the contemplation of what nature truly is. Throughout the centuries, in ancient times and then from the Renaissance onward, all European scholars would be raised with thorough instruction in the philosophy of the Greeks, especially with regard to its two central figures, Plato and Aristotle, portrayed here in Raphael's famous painting, The School of Athens. Much attention was given to Socrates, who is often considered to be Greece's first great philosopher, admired for his teachings and heroized in his execution as a martyr of free thought. But with the widespread allure of these three philosophers, many others have since faded into the background. A great number of thinkers before Socrates who made interesting arguments and led fascinating lives. These are the Pre-Socratic philosophers. The original writing of these Pre-Socratics has been mostly lost. We know them largely through fragments and references from other ancient sources. But time has not diminished the mystical, profound quality of their thinking, much of which is actually fundamental to understanding their successors. In them we find a blend of highly abstract thought with simple observation. They were able to extract cosmic principles just from the operations of nature which they saw around them every day. To them, the world's deepest secrets could be read directly from the ways in which it appeared. Their perceptions of the world continue to merit further attention and respect. Little is known about the life of Thales of Miletus, one of the first pre-Socratic philosophers, except that he successfully predicted a solar eclipse, a very rare and marvelous phenomenon in the ancient world. But this was a success of astronomy and mathematics, one which was repeated by several other people in various cultures. Thales of Miletus will be remembered through history for an idea far outside the realm of science, one which would make a statement about the entire universe and cosmos on the basis of his nearby surroundings. Normally, one would accept the everyday perception that nature consists of a large number of different elements and materials. But Thales of Miletus is known chiefly for one important puzzling thesis. The entire world and all kinds of things in it are made of water. Thales believed that water is the one basic substance that constitutes the universe. Every other thing and element that we see around us has taken its form from water and will eventually return to it. Friedrich Nietzsche, a renowned 19th century German philosopher and antiquities scholar, was of the opinion that Thales was the first true philosopher in the West. Thales' idea that the world is made from water is important in three ways, as Nietzsche notes.
Firstly, because it tells something about the primal origin of all things. Second, because it does so in language devoid of image or fable. And finally, because contained in it is the thought, all things are one, he begins to believe in nature by believing at least in water.
The early Greeks had generally thought the natural world as a screen over gods and divine forces. Nature had no independent reality, but was only a stage of illusion for superhuman beings. But for the first time, beginning with Thales, nature can have an existence of its own, in its own substance, without any divine involvement. He uses no stories and no images which characterize religion. Instead, he makes one generalizing statement to encompass the reality of all things. This makes Thales the first philosopher in the West. After Thales comes Anaximander, who theorized that all animal species first arose out of vapors, and that human beings have origins in the sea. For in primordial times, he says,
there arose fish, or animals much like fish, and humans grew in them. And then the fish-like animals burst, and men and women emerged.
like Thales, he looked for a principle, a first basis of reality in the natural world, one universal truth that would define every substance and quality. But not a single thing could last long enough in one form to be the eternal substance he was looking for. Everything that exists is doomed to pass away into something else. Anaximander noticed how everything that exists comes into being and passes away. Darkness gives rise to light, and light collapses into darkness. The cold can smother heat, but heat arises out of the cold. Spotless white easily turns to black. Life passes out of every creature, but life also comes into being out of lifeless matter. As for water, it underwent transformations all the time. Anaximander could not tolerate such volatility in something that was supposed to be the foundation of all existence. Where is it that these things come from? It was illogical to think that they would be born out of nothingness, so what was creating them? And where did they go when they disappeared? If things that exist cannot come out of nothingness, they cannot go into nothingness either. Therefore, Anaximander decided that there must be some vague, universal substance from which everything comes, and into which everything goes away. He calls this operon, meaning limitless, or infinite, or indefinite. People in every age have put forth some suggestion as to how absolute infinity might appear, but Anaximander insists that it is utterly unknowable. The limitless thus spawns all things and properties of nature and receives them back into itself when they pass away. The limitless itself always has been and always will be. We are unaware of its constant presence because it is undefinable, with no definite traits by which we could perceive it. Otherwise, it would come into being and pass away like all the things it produces. And yet all the things in the universe which we do know come out of it. Anaximander has taken philosophy much further into the realm of abstraction than Thales did, by saying that the underlying nature of the world is something entirely elusive to any direct comprehension. Heraclitus of Ephesus, born roughly a decade after the death of Anaximander, was very eccentric. He said that the sun is as big as it appears to be, the size of a human foot. And he is said to have tried curing an illness by burying himself in manure. Heraclitus, like Thales, believed that the universe was formed from one element, and that one element, he said, was fire. Heraclitus associated fire with the divine and eternal cosmos, the life-giving sun, lightning, the moon, and other bright energies of the upper atmosphere. Every human soul is made from a tiny amount of this heavenly fire. Everything comes from fire, Heraclitus says, and will return to it. Fire creates all other elements by transforming into them through a certain downward path. Flame condenses to become air. The vapors condense to become water. And water, finally, condenses to become earth. And the elements can also rise back up this same path, becoming lighter and less dense, until they reassume their first form and reunite with the eternal fire of the sky. But while Heraclitus believed that the universe was formed on the basis of fire, he saw rushing water as an important metaphor for a different truth about the nature of all things, even the heavens. For he observed that you cannot stand in the same river twice. Because the water of the river is constantly flowing downstream, you always stand in different waters each time you set foot in the river. And because the waters are never in the same place, it will always be a different river. Heraclitus applied the metaphor on a broad scale. You cannot even stand in the same universe twice. The universe of one moment is inevitably different from the one in the moment before. Everything in the world is constantly changing. Like Anaximander before him, Heraclitus paid attention to how fleeting and permanent everything in the universe is. Everything exists in a constant state of coming to be and passing away. Some things quickly, others over great spans of time. The cycle itself is the only thing eternal and unbreakable. And nothing, no matter how solid and seemingly changeless, escapes its pull. It must be hard to dwell on this understanding, with its weighty implications for human life. All human things, too, must die off with time. Not only people themselves, but all the things they achieve and the nations they serve and the memories of who they were. It is said that Heraclitus withdrew from society and suffered from deep depression. And so he was known among the people of antiquity and their Western posterity as the weeping philosopher. Like the rest of the universe, all human life is like a river. Every individual life is like a river, and the river is always flowing. At this point comes a philosopher by the name of Parmenides, the most influential of the Pre-Socratics. He refused to think of the world as a rushing river. In fact, he arrived at an opposite conclusion which runs counter to all common sense. Like Heraclitus, Parmenides of course saw a world full of constant motion and change on all sides, things coming into being and passing away and changing places. But unlike Heraclitus, Parmenides refused to believe in it. He refused to believe in all the motion and change that takes place before our eyes. And so he would make a bizarre and perplexing conclusion: a world without any movement, a universe which actually never changes at all. After philosophers like Thales, Anaximander, and Heraclitus, who supported their reasoning with empirical observations, Parmenides had a very different approach. He was intensely concerned with pure logic, focusing not on how the world was, but how he thought it should be. And when his picture of a logical world repeatedly failed to match up with the world that appeared to him, he decided that this illogical world of appearance was a fake, a disguise for the real one. Parmenides thus discussed truth and the power of illusion, the ways in which reality is totally different from the way it appears to our senses. His long masterpiece of philosophy, now lost to time, was divided into two main sections. The first was titled The Way of Truth, and the second, The Way of Opinion. The real world, Parmenides said, was motionless at all times, forever. Stranger still, he said that the real world consisted of only one substance. The distinction between all the different elements and materials in the world we see is just illusion, like all movement and change. In the invisible, real world, there are no differences or boundaries within the one homogeneous substance, and there is nothing which changes in it either. It is one thing with one uniform quality, suspended, motionless, finite, spherical. How did Parmenides arrive at the conclusion of such a world? By deducing that everything about the visible world is illogical and therefore doesn't exist. Firstly, Parmenides believed that change, whether it is generation, destruction, or motion, is a logical impossibility. These changes, he reasoned, would require some unoccupied space, but Parmenides believed that empty space was illogical and impossible. Real nature never had a void or gap, and therefore there is nowhere from which things may come into being, and nowhere into which they may pass away. If things cannot shift around, and there is no room for motion, all motion and change must be an illusion. Furthermore, if all of this is true, and there is no empty space, all points of the universe must be in contact with one another, and that is why Parmenides does not believe in a differentiation of substance. There is no space for the path of the elements. Fire, Air, water, and earth are, in reality, one and the same. But one must not make the mistake of thinking that the world of reality is somehow separate from the world of illusion. They are really the same. We all somehow coexist within the world of perpetual unity and sameness. Our deceptive senses produce the illusion. Out of the true homogeneous blend, our senses envision false images, the perception of separate shapes and varying qualities, such as color, sound, tone, and texture. Then comes the illusion of motion, while everything is actually still in one place. The philosophy of Parmenides gained prominence among the Greeks. One of his students, Zeno of Elea, portrayed here as showing his disciples two doorways representing truth and illusion, created a famous logical paradox in defense of Parmenides. It involves the strong and fleet-footed Greek hero Achilles and a tortoise. Achilles and a tortoise engage in a foot race. Achilles gives the tortoise a head start, and when it has gone a certain distance, he then runs to catch up with it. But look at the space between them. To cross it, Achilles must first get to the halfway point. Then to cross the remainder of the distance, he must get to the halfway point of that. Then to cross the rest of the distance, he must get to the halfway point of that, and then he must get to the halfway point of the next part, and so on and so on. In our world of appearances, Achilles will of course outrun the tortoise, but Zeno argues that this is illogical and impossible, since Achilles would really have to cross an infinite number of points in space in order to win the race. The tortoise's failure has supposedly disproved our universe. So we have profoundly different philosophies. Heraclitus teaches eternal change, and Parmenides eternal sameness. It is hard to believe that these two views could ever be reconciled, but Plato, in fact, did just that. Plato also believed in the difference between the illusions of the senses and the illuminating power of reason. The world of our perceptions is a screen for the real, perfect, and changeless world, which, Plato believed, consists of completely perfect, distinct geometric forms. These forms exist as ideas, ideas which exist objectively and independent of the mind. They are not made of matter and do not occupy space. They never move and never change. We cannot see these forms with our eyes. Our senses can only pick up broken, distorted images of them. The way that our senses show these forms to us is like the way that an amateur might draw a copy of a fine painting. The crude, hasty sketch lacks all the clarity and detail of the original. Likewise, the world which we experience is changeable, imperfect, and destructible to its very foundation. In his fusion of the philosophies of Parmenides and Heraclitus, Plato added an attractive hope that eventually someone who attained pure reason might be able to turn his mind fully away from a world of impermanence into another which was perfect, in some sense even heavenly. We come to Anaxagoras, who lived about 1 century after Thales. Not convinced by either Heraclitus or Parmenides, he went back to Anaximander's drawing board. He also believed in the limitlessness of existence, but now he had to solve the challenge of motion put forth by Parmenides. How were the movements of coming to be and passing away possible without a void? He wrote,
"The Greeks do not have a correct view of generation and destruction, for no thing is generated or destroyed. Rather, they are mingled and dissociated from existing things. And for this reason, they would be correct to call generation mingling and destruction dissociation."
Thus, Anaxagoras denies that things come or go anywhere when they come into being or pass away. In fact, the processes of generation and destruction are just names for interactions between substances. And thus he came to another different mystical statement, that everything exists in everything. Nietzsche explains,
If opposite could be shown to arise from opposite, for example, black from white, then everything is possible. And this actually happens when white snow dissolves into black water. Observation of the productive processes of nature gave Anaxagoras the doctrine that everything originates from everything. He explained nutrition to himself by assuming that invisibly small components of flesh or blood or bone separate from the food and combine with their likes in the body. But if everything can come to be from everything, solid from liquid, hard from soft, black from white, flesh from bread, then everything must be contained in everything as well. Contained in gold there must be also silver, snow, bread, and flesh, but only in very small shares. The whole thing is named for being mostly gold substance.
so any given substance contains all the other substances of the universe, in such tiny amounts that we cannot recognize them. Everything is made of everything. Everything comes from everything, and everything goes into everything, an infinite mixture. There is no material pure in itself. Anaxagoras still has to explain how these substances began to move. What first set the universe in motion? Anaxagoras proposed that there is a divine mind which acts on the universe. It has no physical form and operates only by the power of its own cosmic thinking. Anaxagoras gives it the simple name of thought. Unlike physical substances, thought is not mixed with anything. It is purely itself and nothing else. Not even the most infinitely tiny part of it is to be found in something else. It is complete and independent, and because it exists free of physical substance, it possesses no definite trait by which we might know it. It is always manipulating the motions of the physical world because it is working tirelessly on one task, to separate every substance from one another. It seeks to make all the elements pure and undivided, to resolve the infinitely tiny mixtures which create chaos. Eventually, in some immeasurably great length of time, it will structure the universe into all of its pure substances and accomplish the perfect organization of reality. There are many other pre-Socratic philosophers not discussed here with interesting ideas and personalities, such as Pythagoras, who taught the doctrine of reincarnation and claimed to recognize things from his past lives. Diogenes of Apollonia, who believed that the element of air was the primal substance of the universe, and gave all beings the power of sentient thought. And Democritus, who introduced the idea that the world is made up of atoms. All of these thinkers contributed somehow to the development of philosophy, which would eventually produce natural science. And there is something to be admired in the way that each early mind set out to understand all the universe.